sort of like to think of myself as an all-rounder, but I also joke that, you know, I'm quite good at lots of things, but not amazing at anything.
We beg to differ. We beg to differ, definitely.
But I like to try things, and I'm sort of not as afraid to fail. So I have, you know, tried things and failed, definitely. And there's a couple of films out there that, like, you know, don't watch Traveling Light, it's terrible. But, you know, but there's you know, I'm not afraid to fail. And I think the more work that you do, the more you can kind of be really forgiving of yourself if things aren't completely successful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really interesting, that mindset you have, and I think it's really come through in your book. And you are absolutely a wonderful author, I think. Finding My Bella Vita was such a wonderful book. I loved your voice. It was really authentic and vulnerable and really relatable. And not just because I'm trying to pitch it out to you guys so that you buy it. But in terms of tell us a little bit of how this book came to being. When did you find out? How did it come to being? And how did you write it?
It's a funny story. I mean, it's not that funny, but I had always wanted to write a book. So I studied, you know, writing at university. And I think writing a book takes a lot of confidence. And I probably, as I moved into acting and I just it just went on the back burner. And then just weirdly, my manager was pitching some of her other clients to some publishers, and she went, "Can I pitch you to write a book? Would you like to do it?" And I went, "Yeah, I actually really would." So we pitched around and we had a lot of interest, and then it came back and I'd chosen my publisher, and then I went to sit down to do it, this memoir, and I was like, oh no, like it was just the worst. I sat there for like a month, and I kept starting it going, I was born in, and I just felt so like icky and so egotistical and so embarrassing, and I almost pulled out. And then I just could not get started. And then I thought about like my favorite books, and I went back and sort of read the beginning of a lot of my favorite books, and I thought, I remember writing this essay about my nonna when I sat down with her when I was about 19 and wrote this essay for university. And I thought, if I could just find it, maybe that's a good way to start. And so I went into the garage and I opened this box I hadn't opened for ages, and it was just sitting on the top. And I went, I think I got my start. And the minute I started, it was the right way for me to start. Just writing about her life and her story, then I felt I'd earned the right to talk about myself.
Wow. And that's so powerful, because it is that start of it where you start with your family and starting with your origin of your nonna and stuff like that. So it sounds like you didn't start the book with the intention of writing about your family, but family is so important through the book. Can you talk a little bit about your family and how they made you into who you are today?
Yeah, I think like in the book I do talk a lot about my grandparents. So I think my grandparents had a huge impact on my life, and I wanted to celebrate them as much as I could. But I did lean on my Italian side quite a lot in the book, just because I found it I thought it might be interesting, and I felt like sometimes those migrant stories get lost, and it's good to remember them and how hard it was for people. You know, I know like now being Italian's like cool, but in the 80s it certainly wasn't. Yeah. And for my dad it certainly wasn't. So I think it's nice to remember that stuff and reflect back on it, because if we don't reflect on those stories, then we're never going to change the future, because it's often just a new group of people that's getting picked on. So I really wanted to talk about the negatives and the positives and how much being Italian enriched my life.
Absolutely. And I think it's just so clear how deep that your experience with your grandparents, your nonna and your nana were. And I think it was interesting to find out that reading that towards the end of it, that you took a little bit of liberty with your nonna story and everything like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had, obviously I tried to be as truthful as possible, but certainly when you're writing a story about someone else's life, you know, the language needs to be a little more creative, and I sort of just put my impression of what I thought she might be feeling at the time to make it read like a fiction. So I sort of, you know, I showed it to my dad, he loved it, but I definitely just, you know, when there's lots of sort of talk in the first chapter about, well, and she was feeling this and she was thinking this. I don't know that she was feeling that and thinking that, but I felt like I was honouring her memory by creating this beautiful fiction based on her life. But all the facts are true. Yeah, definitely.
And that's, I guess, the writing part of it, isn't it? Do you discover yourself as a writer is to, I believed that all of those feelings were true. And that's kind of what you're doing, is bringing that story to life. You've written before, you're a storyteller. I think that was one of the things that I felt reading this book, is you've always been a storyteller. And what was it like telling your own story, or finally kind of going, I'm writing a book, as opposed to other storytelling that you've done?
It was good. I did struggle with, I know I talk about ego a lot, but I did struggle with the embarrassment of telling my own story. So I really had to fight through that stuff. And I also had to fight through trying to make people like me. I think as a woman in the world, we've sort of got that thing where we want everyone to like us. And so sometimes I'd write things for the result. So I go, well, people will like this about me. And then I take it out and go, no, just be truthful, just write your story. So that was the difficult part of editing, just being really truthful, especially when it came to the Survivor stuff. Being really truthful and writing about my experience, and not writing to get a reaction from people, because I wanted people to feel warmly towards me.
That's so interesting, and finding that authenticity. Because it does feel like sometimes you're really performing, and I guess as a performer, you kind of want to elicit a reaction when actually this is about you, and you have to put yourself on the page.
It is embarrassing writing about yourself.
Oh, totally.
Like, it's so embarrassing. I mean, I'm so glad I did it, because it's given me confidence as a writer, which is what I've always wanted to do. But a lot of times I'm like, oh, it's so embarrassing. Like, but shut up, Pia, and then I have to have a break for myself.
But that's that awareness, I think, because you are so vulnerable in the book. And I think that's the thing, is that you allow yourself to lean into that embarrassment, and it comes off really strongly in the page, and is, I think, a really good sign of a great writer, is kind of being able to put that there. And it sounds like it was a really difficult thing. Do you have tips or ideas? How did you get through that, working through that embarrassment?
I think just lots of editing, self-editing. So going back and reading it aloud really helped me, because I guess being an actor, I'm used to reading, saying words aloud. Even though I get a lot of credit for looking for Alibrandi, I didn't. Even a woman last night was like, I loved your book. And I'm like, I didn't. I text Melina, I'm like, here I go again. I'm like, thank you, I know. She's like, it was brilliant. And the John Barton character, how did you think of that? I was like, it just came to me. But, I think for me, just lots of self-editing, and just, I did send, when someone else was involved in the story, I would send it off to them and see if they liked it. And if they liked it, I remember the first really positive reaction I had was I put my sister a lot in the beginning of the book, because I talk about a lot of the wacky things that my aunts would do to us as Italian children, and lots of curse removal and mad stuff. And so I sent it to my sister, and she just loved it, and she said I was laughing through the whole thing, and that was the first moment where I felt really confident to be pushed on and to finish the book. Yeah.
Wow. It sounds like as you were writing it, you were kind of finding the story through the entire process.
Yeah, I definitely plotted out, how the story was going to go and what each chapter was. But it's a lot easier, right now I'm thinking of another story, and that's harder when it's not there. It's a lot easier when it's your life, because you know the chapters. So, and it was, I was about to turn 50, so I felt like it was my life felt really clear in these sort of 10-year chunks. Okay. So it was a nice life audit. Yeah,
definitely. And there are no spoilers in that way. You don't have to figure out the ending or anything like that.
I'm alive.
Makes it easy. Yeah, exactly. Spoiler, she's still here.
But where's the body?
Exactly. But it was interesting, because when we do get to, it sounds like, because you went through, I loved how the book was bookended by your family.
Thanks.
And that idea of, you start with your Nonna story and your early visit to Sicily. And then it seemed like you decided to go back as you were writing it. Where did that come from?
My husband, actually. Yeah, and great. I got a tax-deductible trip to Sicily.
Nice.
So I was saying I don't know how to finish it, and I was like, I think maybe, and I sort of mentioned, I said, I think I've got this weird feeling I have to go back to Volcano to finish it, because that's where it begins. And then it was my 50th birthday, and he really wanted to go to to Las Vegas and see U2 at the Sphere. And I think he sort of was like, well, if she does that, I can go see U2 at the Sphere. Which he did. So he had all these frequent flyer points. So I think he sort of pushed me like, you should do it. It's a great end to your book. So but the minute it was a bit stressful, because when I got there, all of a sudden I'd written the book, And then all of a sudden I get there and I'm like, how am I going to finish this book here? And I thought this is a very expensive mistake to make. But once I got there, it was so easy.
That's amazing. Absolutely meant to be. I think.
Yeah.
But it does it is that bookendingness that I think brings the story into its little finality and stuff like that. And it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
There you go. I do want to, of course, talk a little bit about Looking for Alibrandi, because it is such a corner touchstone story that Melina Marchetta, who we both know, has written wonderfully. And I love YA, of course, being a YA writer myself. And it is such a powerful story. But I was surprised, you came to the story as an adult, didn't you? And then you read yourself into it. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like to read it for the first time?
Yeah, it was a funny story because I think in Victoria it wasn't on the VCE curriculum, but in Sydney it was. And so I'd heard about this film auditioning of this Italian girl through Kik, who ended up playing my boyfriend in the movie. And I was walking down the street and he's like, I'm just really stressed out, man. Like, I'm going for this film. They can't find the lead. And he's like, you should go for it. And I'm like, my agent would have called me if it was right for me, all that kind of stuff. And then they rang me. As soon as I got home, my phone rang and I rang Kik and I said, I need to borrow your book. And I just remember sitting in bed and then reading it, which I know probably every Italian actress felt the same. But I read it and I went, oh, I think I found my life's purpose. It was just such a profound moment, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't play her. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's the power of Melina's story, is that I think a lot of people have had that. And I've spoken with so many writers who've had the same reaction and gone on to write their own stories because they were so inspired by it. And I think it's just the way she captured growing up, obviously family and all of that. It just really spoke as such an important thing. And I know that you were like, I have to play this and everything.
I think it was the first time I'd ever seen myself reflected back in fiction. And I think that's why it meant a lot to a lot of people, the film, because it was the first time they'd seen themselves reflected back. And I know people from all different migrant cultures felt that, not just Italians. You know, lots of people come up to me and go, oh, I was brought up Maltese or Chinese, or, you know, and it reminded me of how embarrassing this was or that was. And so it was nice. It really touched on something special.
Absolutely. And now you are a part of that, ingrained into that. How has that experience been like, realizing that people are coming up to you and being like, you have actually changed my life being that?
Yeah, I didn't know it was going to go on for so long.
Still here, still talking about
Especially
it.
when people look a bit confused, they're like, you look like that young girl. I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm just old. I've got an estrogen patch on. I'm just battling through menopause like everyone else. But yeah, I don't think Melina or Kik or I realised it had gone on for that long. I think, you know, there's always difficulties in being in something so successful when perhaps you're still struggling financially and personally with your own career. So that was an odd thing, but I think the community of us all being together and going through that together has made it really special. And I think just very early on, I started to realise, maybe 12 months later, I realised that this probably wasn't going away. And I thought, well, how lucky am I? Like, I can make someone's day. It's not that hard. Like, I can really make someone's day. And not many people get that opportunity to meet someone and just make them smile and make them happy for the rest of the day. And so I sort of took that quite seriously. And yeah, I don't take that lightly. And I feel really happy that I get to do that. You know, I can be having a shitty day and then I can make someone's day and they're all excited and I'm like, it makes my day better. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful mindset to have, to kind of go, actually, this is something really positive, and it just shows the inner person that you are, to realize that.
As long as my patch is on. Bloody hell.
You'll be like, that's the last thing they say on your deathbed. You'll be like, yep, that was me. Yeah, exactly. But it is so important and everything like that. So yeah. And in terms, I guess, and continuing with that, how do you feel? Are there other stories that you've connected with since then that you've kind of seen, actually, this is like Josie Alibrandi, or what sort of others, do you keep an eye out for those types of stories? You mentioned migrant stories or something like that. Have there been other stories like that that have touched you in that way?
You know, I do. I really like to watch and read migrant stories. Like, I know, you know, Ben Law. I love The Family Law. I thought that was such a great show. And I'm a huge reader, and I do like YA as well. You know, my daughter's really into Stephen King, even though she's only 14. But sometimes I'll read some YA, read like The Hate U Give, and I'll be like, I love great young female characters. I thought Heartstopper was a beautiful series of books that she got into, and I thought the TV show was really great. So I definitely, I feel really, I guess because YA changed my life, I've got a real soft spot for it.
Definitely, and all of those stories that you mentioned, they tackle these different stories, but they're similar. It's identifying coming of age, what's going on, and in this environment, which is very, where our time is at. I love Alice Oseman, and absolutely, and it's just all of these wonderful. And I'm glad that your daughter is giving you that space to rediscover new YA.
Exactly.
Like
It's been
exactly.
Good.
Absolutely love Family Law, and
it's so good, so good. If you haven't seen it, it's really good.
Absolutely, And Ben is, we mutually know Ben as well, and Ben's great as a storyteller, and I think he also touches on these migrant stories and stuff like that as well, and how important it is to come of age and find yourself.
Absolutely,
absolutely. So I do want to talk a little bit about Survivor.
Oh my God, we were gossiping so much back there about Survivor, and we couldn't say that in public, but this is what really happened.
I'm sorry, and I'm going to try and make sure.
We have to have the NDA, make people sign NDAs one day and be like, come in, and we're going to tell you what really goes on behind the scenes.
That's right. This is really what happens there. Everybody turn your cameras off, your phones off. We don't want this going out. And I promise I don't want to turn this into a whole Survivor deep dive. We could totally go there. But I was so impressed and amazed to find that Survivor was such an important part of your memoir and stuff like that. Because I wasn't sure, because I think I didn't realize how much it was a part of your coming of age story almost as a young adult.
Absolutely. Because that Survivor came out when Alibrandi came out. And I met my friend Tom through doing Alibrandi. He was a publicist. And he met his boyfriend around the time I met my husband, and we just started these Survivor nights. And I was like, this is the first time I'd ever seen a show where I'm like, I could win that. I just don't know. And Tom would be like, okay. And then 20 years later, I'm still on the couch going, no. What they should have done is this and this and this and this and this. And Tom was actually on my family and friends list to come. And even before I left, I went, right, okay, so if you do come, and if we do get to do a reward challenge, you can't win it, because if you win the reward, he's like, oh my God. So anyway, so now, they used to roll their eyes at me when I was watching Survivor for 20 years, and now if we watch it, I'm like, you know what they should have done? He's like, I get it, you won. But yeah, I loved it. I just loved, I don't like camping, I don't like the outdoors, I don't like snakes, I don't like, I like coffee machines. I'm not that person, but I really like the mental game of Survivor. I love the idea of being on a tribe with people, and then halfway through the game you merge and you have to vote those people out in a sinister enough way that you can win the game, but also have them like you enough at the end to vote for you to win. And I just think that's such an amazing... And you get to lie and no one cares. It's so good. It's so good. Not the best.
It's absolutely fascinating. I think they started it as it's actually a social experiment more than anything else. It's a game, but it's really a social experiment of how to make all of that happen.
Yeah. And America's now only 26 days. I don't love the new one. I like... Because you're still human in 26 days. By day 40, there's no soul.
You've lost your humanity. You're you're a zombie, something out there. No, absolutely. But it is fascinating. So, of course, the big question is, how was it different being such a huge fan, going, this is what they should have done, et cetera, to actually being out there? Were there differences? How was that?
Yes. The biggest difference I did realize was that you couldn't go out with a game. You could go with a game plan, but my game plan was to not really play in the first sort of few weeks. And then the first vote, everyone wanted me out. So I had to play really hard. But I did notice that the thing that surprised me was that you really have to understand your social cachet. So if you go out there sort of balls to the wall and, start acting like an alpha, but you're social, you sort of have to work yourself out socially. So if you feel like you're a little on the bottom rung, then just hang there for a bit. And it was sort of like high school. And then I was shocked by how feral and toxic it got in the last 7 days. I was like, wow, this is almost too much for me. It was intense. Yeah, and people really, lost their cool quite a bit.
You're no longer human in some way.
I just tried to keep my cool. I was surprised by how much just keeping my cool was what got me to the end, and just not sort of before I went out there, I went, don't get flustered by anything. So I just made sure I didn't get flustered by anything, even though inside I was like dying.
Internal screaming, so much of it. But do you think your professional experience, I guess, being an actor, how did that help you in kind of keeping your cool and understanding your social cachet?
I think so, but I know my friend Sian played twice, and she came second twice, and I do think being the new kid at school was really helpful because I was used to walking into a new environment and going, okay, how am I going to survive here? So I think a little bit of that and a little bit of being an actor and just being used to being around new people.
Yeah, and you can kind of suss out your characters, what's going on. It's more a people study than anything else.
It's so fun watching all the alpha males just eat each other.
And you just hang back?
You just like hang back and they're like, oh, man. And I remember this guy in mine, because I was with these bloody athletes. And I love athletes, I didn't mean to roll my eyes. But they just found my Muppet arms really offensive. And he came up to me, he goes, it's a shame you can't play Survivor, isn't it? I was like, sorry, what? And he's like, it's a shame because you need the male strength. You need male strength, male upper body strength. And I was like, I know, it's awful. And then I walk off and I'm like, we're going to get him out. And he went home that day.
Oh my God, same. With the Muppet arms, you just play really innocent and cute and sweet and lean into those tropes as much as possible. Yeah. It gets you far.
It does. And then once Merge came, so I think people were so used to thinking that I was not great at challenges because I'm not a team sport, sort of sporty person. And because I do yoga, I can just stand in one spot for a really long time. And I think people didn't realise that I was okay at those ones, so that helped me.
It's staying underestimated as much as possible and everything like that. I had none of that. I could do a puzzle, so I was very grateful I had a couple puzzles.
I said I could, but I couldn't. I was like, I'm so good at puzzles, and then a puzzle one came, and I'm like, oh, it must be the lack of food.
Oh, I'm hungry. Yeah, and that's true. That does really impact you. And actually, it is kind of one of those things. And what it was really funny because I loved reading the Survivor pages, and then also was like, oh my God, I'm being re-traumatized myself. But one of the things, and it was funny, and I read this part to my husband yesterday, last night, and like, these words, this is exactly me, and I'm going to read it because I realize it's very short. But I really connected with this particular part, which is, after making my billionth random deal with the universe, I told myself, okay, well, the worst thing that can happen is I can't do the challenge and I get sent home embarrassed. I decided to surrender to what was going to happen and stop all of the mental gymnastics. It worked. I have never forgotten it. When I started to obsess over random things, I would take a deep breath and repeat, surrender. Even though I left Survivor broken in some ways, I was healed in others. This part of surrendering and letting go of control, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I did. I think, I was brought up Catholic and praying for things, and I think maybe like some obsessive thinking, and I think some of that really came to the forefront when I was on Survivor, in that I started going, okay, God, if you just let me survive, because I don't like heights as well, I forgot to mention that, or swimming, so I was really traumatized with fear about just the challenges and then just the day-to-day, and my brain was going crazy, and then as soon as I made that choice, I went, oh, you've got to stop this, just surrender to whatever's going to happen, whatever today is going to be, the worst thing that can happen is you just go home, hopefully not in a body bag, but you go home. And I started to really, it was about probably week 3, I think, so maybe like day 21, I started to really, really embrace that thinking. And the minute I embraced that thinking, everything just got easier. And I still do it now when I try and, mentally control things that are out of my control. I just go, just surrender to it, it's fine. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And it's kind of helped me with my kids too, I think.
I think it's such a great life lesson. That's the same thing that I took away from it. I'm a very type A person, love to be in control, can't, obsess over things, need things to go right, pre-plan everything. Once you realize you can't control it, what does that feel like? So for anyone who wants to go on this mental journey of letting go, becoming a better person, go on Survivor and traumatize yourself. and you learn to let go. But
Yeah.
it is such an interesting thing. And I think it sounds like, but I also feel like you've always had a little bit of that mindset, even though you probably from that Catholic upbringing. But it
Yeah.
sounds like, you are someone who can take a different stance, have a different mindset of, this is actually a positive or something like that. And it has that little bit of resilience in there.
Yeah, I definitely tried it. My dad was very much, I guess because he'd had sort of, tough, poverty-stricken upbringing, and he'd faced a lot of racism, and he's just one of those tough. He's kind of like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, he's just like a bit wrong, but kind of a bit right. And he always sort of instilled in me, it's like, life isn't really about how many times you get knocked down, it's how you pick yourself up. So I've always been someone who's able to pick myself up, but I definitely did struggle with that in the early days of Survivor. Especially with, they do blindfold you and yell at you, and it's a very different environment. There is zero free will, and I found that really difficult. But once I let go of that, everything felt easier.
And how has that kind of rolled on now? You mentioned a little bit with your kids and stuff like that. How have you kind of taken that idea of on?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know how you feel about Survivor, but I definitely feel like, there was some negative mental repercussions for a while, but the positive repercussions for me are like, I did that. I can do anything. I get on the treadmill, I'm like, I don't want to run for half an hour. And I'm like, no, I can probably do it. So, and I do say that with my kids. I'm like, you don't know what you're capable of. You're capable of so much more than you think you are. It's just that you haven't been put in those extreme environments yet. So just breathe through things. Like my daughter gets really nervous about exams. And I'm like, the worst that can happen is you fail. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's the worst. And so I try to sort of bring that, that mindset over to them.
It is, and it's such a beautiful, important mindset, and feeling okay with discomfort and feeling uncomfortable all the time.
And realising people around you are more forgiving than we think they are. I think there's the language when I was growing up was that I was so afraid of, what people thought of me or doing the wrong thing. And now I think people are way more able to discuss feeling uncomfortable or, their own sadness or their own, I'm not feeling good today, or mentally I'm feeling like this. And I think that language is really fantastic. And, I'm happy that those younger people get to grow up in that environment.
Yeah, definitely. I think the language is changing now. And we were even talking about how some of the things that were okay 15 years ago aren't now. And young people are growing up with the ability to say, hey, this isn't okay.
Exactly,
and that's really important.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about, there are some negative repercussions, and I did want to talk a little bit about the bullying experience, because it was interesting, because even your prologue starts with a throwaway line to a supposed bully, and Ozmom85, we're looking at you. I think you made her up. I don't know.
Well, I think it's 88.
That's it. You did.
It was close.
Yeah. And also, when you did go on Dancing with the Stars, I think some of the headlines that they came up with was like, it's never too late to get revenge. But talk a little bit about that experience of bullying and some of the strength you've taken away, because I do think that's what you've mentioned is the strength of it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that people used to talk to me about online bullying, and I was a bit like, people in the public eye, and I was like, oh, that's sad, but I didn't really get it. And then when I was on Survivor, it was such an odd experience. It was like me and two guys voted out this guy that had a great edit and everyone loved, but I was the only one that got bullied for it online. I think it was, I don't want to say it's gender bias, but I think it was gender bias. And I think gender bias was in the edit, because we weren't in an alliance. I wasn't in an alliance with him, but the other guys were. But it was insane, and it was only probably a week of my life. Very occasionally still, I get someone like message me and threaten violence towards me, like, I can't believe you voted him out. And like, that's the whole point of the game. But it's one thing to talk about that stuff, and it's one thing to be bombarded with it. And so I'm very conscious now about when I see other people suffering a public pile-on, and it can be for really tiny, tiny things. And you can't imagine how damaging it is until you've experienced it, especially when it's threats of violence. And so I have, I joined up with Dolly's Dream, which is an anti-bullying charity, because I think, so for me, I was in my mid-40s. I had a family, I have lots of friends, I know who I am. It was absolutely traumatising and heartbreaking, and I thought, what if that was a child or a teenager suffering this stuff and they don't know who they are yet? And I honestly was so surprised by how socially acceptable it's become. And you know, people would say the most horrendous things to me online, and I'm like, but this stuff kills people. I just voted someone out of Survivor. So I'm like, I couldn't understand, and I think it's, or people would say, you know, well, you went on it, you should have thicker skin. I'm like, I don't have to have thick skin.
No.
I don't think people should have to have thick skin. I think we should be controlling how we behave online. And so I talk a lot to my children about that. I think, you know, with Dolly's Dream, we talk a lot about changing our behaviours. Because it might be funny, you watch maths and you're like, you suck. But those people read that and it hurts. And I think a lot of people don't know. They know it might happen, but until it's happened to you, you can't imagine how awful it is.
Absolutely, and I think we forget how vulnerable people are at the other end. There's a real human being on the other end of that. And it's funny because, of course, we think you're someone who's in the public eye, who has been in the public eye for so long, but this is different. And it does feel different, doesn't it? Even for someone who's been through media. And what do you think's behind that, just out of, in your experience?
I do think, you know, I think it is because it's socially acceptable. So, you know, the Oz mummy, she really didn't like me. And she'd go on all these forums. And then I went, who is she? And I looked on her page and she was like a mum of 2 little kids. And she wrote all love all the time. That was her sort of title on her Instagram. And I'm like, okay. But I thought, well, if she's doing that, then she's teaching that to her kids. And then this is the cycle. And if I sort of a couple of times bit back with people, and they would get so mad, and I thought, God, this is the only forum where the abuser defends their right to abuse, and the onus is on the victim to just cope with it. And I think there's something not right there. And, you know, the internet's new. I'm hoping that we can change that, and hopefully it's sort of as socially unacceptable as smoking in a car with a kid at some point. But I think something's got to be done,
Yeah, and you're right. I think it is being aware that the internet is new and we're all kind of going through this journey on the first time. So even those of us who've, you know, been around for a long time is like, oh, what do we do with this? And not realizing that that's the impact that it's having. But it does hurt kids.
Yeah.
It hurts people. And
so now I just block and delete. I'm like, block and delete. I tell everyone, just block and delete. I mean, it's not, knock on wood, happened to me until I get into my next pickle. But, you know, I remember it, and I hope that I can use the negative for a positive.
Definitely. But it takes a lot of inner strength and everything. And you have to look after yourself mentally. And one thing I will give kudos to Survivor is I think maybe they got better at it through the years, but they did look after us in some way, or I don't know, maybe you didn't have that experience.
Lucky you.
Oh, gosh. No. But definitely I think being aware now that this is important because it does impact. I always say it's really interesting. There was the experience of being on the show. Then there's the experience watching the show.
2 traumas, I think, yeah.
And then there's also the experience of watching people watching you on the show. And it does appear out of nowhere, like years later, people are still sending hateful messages for something you did like 4 or 5 years ago. What's going on?
Well, they do watch it all over the world. Because I was at Disneyland and people are staring at me and I'm like, what? And be like, you're that chick from Survivor. Oh my God, you won. And like,
you're like, what?
I'm like, damn
they
it.
watched it for the first time. Exactly. Yeah. But it's so impactful, and it's something that we just have to be mindful of.
And also because, you know, like when my time on Survivor, if it was 10,000 messages, 9,000 and, you know, 500 were great. But it's the 500 terrible ones that I remember.
That's true, isn't it? We always focus on the negative, and we have to remember, actually, that most of the stuff is positive.
Yeah.
We have to block it out, so it's block and delete.
Yeah.
So look after yourselves, folks, mentally and everything. So, so moving on a little bit, even though I could talk about Survivor all day with you, I was like, no, we have to talk about it. But while you were on Survivor, you did come across a very shocking, I think, understanding of yourself in terms of getting a health diagnosis and your experience with vitiligo. And how was that? What was that like, getting that diagnosis, kind of discovering this about yourself? Tell us a little bit about what it is as well.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, vitiligo is an autoimmune...
Sorry, I said the wrong thing, but vitiligo.
I did, for like a year when I had it, I'm like, vitiligo? It's an autoimmune condition where your immune system overreacts and attacks the pigment in your skin. And so my nan had psoriasis, which is an autoimmune condition of the skin. My mum has alopecia. My mum's sister has alopecia. So when I went on Survivor, I was a bit like, I wonder if I'm going to get alopecia. I've always had this thing, like, am I going to get alopecia? And so I remember asking people to check my head all the time. Like, Janine, check my head. Am I going bald? She's like, no, you're good. She goes, but your skin's looking weird. And I was like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And then the producer came down and she said, Amelia came down and she's like, I just need to ask you what's going on with your skin. And I went, I don't have a mirror. Like, we don't have mirrors out there. I don't know. And there's like the little van, van. So I ran to the van. I'm like, cover me. And I sort of tried to look in and I realised that all the pigment had gone from the sides of my face and my eyebrows had gone grey. And I just thought it was a fungus. And then I went back to, when I got home, they were nice on Survivor. I said, could you book me an appointment to see a dermatologist as soon as I get home? And I did. And I remember him, so unhelpful. He put this little thing up against my skin and he went, oh! And I was like, that's not good. He's like, oh my God. I was like, what? He went, you've got vitiligo. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, it's an autoimmune disease. And I went, oh no, because my fear has always been like passing on those autoimmune diseases to my children. So it was tough. It was tough because and then I thought it would go away when I got home, but then my whole, the whole front of my face. So, you go really white, like as white as a sheet. And I was shooting a show at the time, and I was shooting Mustangs, and I kept walking poor Lizzie, the makeup artist. I just have a new patch every day because I started Mustangs like 2 days after I got back from Survivor.
I can't believe it.
And I'm like, morning, Lizzie. And I could see her going, morning. And I'm like, I think I might have got. She's like, it's fine, it's fine. And then I could just see her going, how am I going to fix this? That was so good to me. But it did change my view of how I'd dealt with my appearance throughout my life because I thought, being an actress, you're often getting negative feedback from producers and, mostly in America actually, but just sort of stuff, people saying stuff to you about. And I'd always thought, if I was just prettier or blonder or something, I'd work more. And then I thought, oh my God. And then the first thing that happened to me when I got vitiligo was I was like, well, my career's over. And then I thought, well, that's shit to think, like that my whole career is based on the way I look. And I realised I'd gone from, always sort of being slightly critical of my appearance because of my career, like just wanting to be better looking, to all of a sudden going, I'd just like to walk down the street without people staring at me. And it changed my perspective. And then I'd put up some stuff about vitiligo, and Carly Finlay responded to me and she said, as one of the genetically blessed, I'm so happy that you've been opening up this conversation. And I realised I went far out. Like I realised we're all pretty genetically blessed if we can walk down the street without people staring at us. And I think I've been trying to fit into a system that expected more of me than it should have. And so maybe just rallying for people with visual differences to be on screen more is a better thing I can do than trying to fit into this thing where I'm constantly looking in the mirror questioning myself.
And it's so fascinating that, again, that mindset switch and how important that is to kind of give yourself that control back or feeling like this is something that I can turn into something positive.
Because if something did happen to my kids, I want them to feel like they could be a movie star if they have vitiligo or alopecia or a skin condition or, and so I feel like, I am somewhat in remission. I had a bit of treatment, but I feel like now if it flares up again, I'm okay. But for a while I wasn't. It took a long. It sounds like I'm all profound, but it took about 7 months of crying.
Absolutely. But it's such
me going, my career's over. Oh my God, don't look at me. All that. I had to go through that stuff to get to the point where I'm like, fuck, what am I doing? What am I doing? What I've been doing all my life,
Absolutely inspiring, though, and it is that I would be crying, absolutely. Oh my God, what's going on? But
it's hard. When you look in the mirror, you don't recognise yourself. I mean, it's hard enough getting older, but when it's like overnight, I would wake up overnight, I'd have a new patch. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Oh, but to be then come out that other end and be like, I want to be inspiring is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
so,
saying that, I'm not the only one to get vitiligo on Survivor. I'm like the third person. That's how bad it is.
Wow. Okay, this show is seriously, what's it doing? Exactly, it is. It's a learning prospect. Everyone comes out a little different one way or another. So yeah, all good. Now, I will be opening the floor up to questions. So if you guys have questions for Pia, please, start and prepare them. But before we do that, I do want to ask, you are now, of course, Pia Miranda, the author, the writer. And I think you hinted early on that you were potentially looking at something else. So what is next for Pia Miranda, the author?
I do have an idea for something that I'm about to pitch out, and because I love to keep writing, I really enjoy it, and I think if I can get through writing about myself, I can get through, and I really loved writing the somewhat fictional element of my book, so I would actually like to write something else. And then I just bought the rights to Alicia Aitken-Radburn's book, The Villain Edit, so I'm hoping to get that made into a TV show.
That's fantastic.
So I'm just writing the Bible for that right now.
I love that. And it sounds like, and one of the things definitely, you're such a storyteller and all of these important stories that you want to put out there and everything. And I'm sure we would be very, very excited to read more.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm lucky to be in this position where I do get to tell stories. So, you know, and plus, why not?
Absolutely. Oh, good. Does anyone, I am going to open the floor up to questions if people have questions. But I also have so many more questions that I could be asking you guys, but I want to make sure that everyone else also has a chance. So do we have any questions for Pia at this stage?
Hi there, thanks so much for your speaking to us today.
Thanks.
My question was there anything in the book that was so either embarrassing or difficult that you weren't sure whether you were going to put it in there?
Yes, there was. I think the whole chapter about meeting my husband was really hard because he's so private, and I kept making it a bit too. I think we've both got a dry sense of humour, so I kept making it a bit too dry, and it just came out like I didn't like him, and I went, I'm just going to like make it actually as sentimental as it was at the time. And so I think that was a bit embarrassing for me, just writing this like romance chapter. But he loved it. You know, he's like, I don't want to read it. I don't want to read it. And I'm like, you've got to read it, because I was really scared about, I was once put in this like weird cookbook without my consent. It was a weird story. And so I was really scared about people not being happy. So anyone who was in the book, I like sent them the chapter, but he put off for like 2 weeks. I'm like, they're gonna send it to edit, like, and then he loved it. Yeah, he's like, oh, it's actually quite sweet.
It's so touching.
Yeah. So I found that a little bit embarrassing. And the Survivor chapter was the hardest to write. I wrote that like 50 times. Yeah, because I was still a bit mad. You know, so it's hard to like. I was still writing through anger, like, fuck those guys, and then I just sort of. And I kept going, no, just write as it happens. So that took a lot of editing.
How did it feel after you got it down?
It felt scary, but I sent it to, I had to get it all legal. So it's good when you know that they're going to take it away and, you know.
Suss it out.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, interesting. I feel like I might have to go through my own therapy and write the Survivor chapter down.
Yeah. And the Harvey Weinstein stuff was strange because I was struggling. I'm like, oh, what can I say legally? Because it wasn't really about him, it was about his friend. And his friend's like out there fine. And so I didn't know what to do, because I thought if I try and cover it legally, it's going to sound like a lie. So then what I did was hash it really lovely. I just sent the story off as it happened, and then they went and changed it for me.
Right.
And then when I read it back, I went, that feels authentic. Yeah, I was just a bit scared about how that was going to play out.
I was really shocked, and I didn't kind of go into the Harvey Weinstein part, and just I was like, oh my God, you too was what I was thinking, and you were so close to it. And we'll talk. Do you want to talk a little bit briefly about that?
It's just a funny story. It's sort of not really. I mean, it is about him, but it was about he had this. I mean, I even got scared talking. Had this friend. You know, there's articles about his friend, and I sort of had this mini thing with his friend. And then all this stuff happened, and then it all sort of led to Harvey trying to get me on this plane. It was just going to be him and I. But when you're a young actress, it's really normal to be chaperoned by people from film companies and stuff, so it's not like a strange thing. But then I remember years later, my husband coming in and going, he had like an article on his phone. He's like, is that the guy you dated? And I read the article and I went, oh my God. And I really had never thought that anything, anyway. It was just a horrible moment when I went, oh God, I'm just another one. Yeah. I'm just another one.
As someone not involved in the film industry, just absolutely shocked. Like, you know, you read about it, and I've read all the articles, but just going, I can't believe that. It was so pervasive and so repeated in everything.
Well, and you go to meetings in America and people are like, I know Harvey, but he's harmless. Harmless.
That's the first words that they say about him.
First word.
That's so
harmless.
Red flag,
I mean,
red flag.
Hilarious. Harmless. Just, you know, he's a bit cheeky. And so you can't blame people for going, okay, like, what do you do? Everyone was saying it, and then now everyone's like, sorry. So I think there's a lot of people, when there's something like that, there's a lot of enablers around there, who around those people who really are just as culpable as the person doing it.
Yeah. And do you think the industry has changed a little bit since that conviction?
My agent's here. No, I do. It's better. I think the industry's... I don't know about America because I don't work there, but I definitely think the industry's really trying. They're really trying to make differences in so many ways, you know, even with intimacy coaches. And I definitely feel like when I was young, if something weird happened, I never felt like I had a voice, whereas now there's always the first thing they say, if there's any problems, this is the person you go to, and then you don't feel like there's going to be repercussions.
That's so important to have that, at least be able to put that language together.
Yeah, so definitely.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you for that question there. Do we have other questions from the audience? Yes.
This might lighten the mood. Did your family ever have sauce-making days? Or is it just an Alibrandi thing? Do you remember the sauce-making day?
Yes, it's so
Tomato
funny.
sauce day.
Do you know what? Sauce-making days is literally followed me around for the last 25 years. At least twice a week, someone comes up to me and goes, "Oh, hi, we did tomato day." And I'm like, great. And then they tell me all about their tomato day and they go, "How bad is it?" And I'm like, "It was a movie." But it is a thing. And my nonna hated them because it was too much hard work. So she's like, "Why would you go to sauce making day? You just wait and then they come and bring the sauce after." And so she was clever. So she's like, "I'm not going, it's like you're stirring all day." And she got the sauce anyway. So I never did sauce making day. But I do tell people in the street, because I like to make them happy, I'm like, "I know." And they show me photos and I'm like, God, it's just like my childhood. So but no, I didn't. But they are a thing. They are, yeah, definitely that, and salami making days is a big one, yeah. Yeah, but I came from the lazy Sicilians who were like, just wait and get the salami. I got many salami and sauce delivered to me, but we never did the hard work.
Outsourcing.
Yeah, outsourcing.
Oh, funny. You are a writer, clearly. We got the puns. Good. Do we have other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for this session. I just wanted to ask, when you were doing an edit and you were also kindly giving chapters to the people involved, if they said, "Oh, that didn't happen," or "What about this?" did you feel you had to include it? Was it kind of stressful editing, I guess?
Thanks, that's a really good question. I had a girlfriend who, it was funny, the things I thought people would be funny about, they were fine about, and then the strangest things people would be odd about, and so I just took it out. I did not want to get to the end. I wanted this to be a happy experience, and I just was so funny about, I just didn't want anyone to be mad at me or to have a negative connotation. So it was weird. I have this story about working in an Indian restaurant, and my girlfriend and I used to, the guy who ran the Indian restaurant, he used to get us to take the wine away at the end of the night with a little bit left, and then we'd all pour all the mix of wine into one glass. And I had her name in there, and she's like, I don't want that in there. I don't want my kids reading that I drank wine. And I was like, we were 18. But she was she just did not want it in there. I was like, oh, of course, I'll take it out. So I took that out. And Greta I sent obviously stuff to Greta, and yeah, there wasn't that much, just little funny things. Or I did send a copy, when I gave my dad a copy, I wrote, "This would have been a better book if you were dead, but I hope you like it anyway," because there's some stuff about him I couldn't put in. So I definitely edited some stuff out about my father, just, when it came to his financial situation and how he got into a bad situation and stuff, because I just didn't want to embarrass him and I wanted him to enjoy it.
Any other questions from people?
Hi, thanks for today
Thank
and for
you.
your wonderful book. And I just wanted to ask about your ballet, because you haven't spoken much about that, and it was obviously played a huge part in your life, along with your acting.
Yeah, it did actually. It's funny because I have a story about, my auntie owned ballet schools, and she still does have quite a few schools in Perth, and I came from a big ballet family, and my mum loves ballet, and it definitely shaped me. I think the thing I love about dance is that, especially when you grow up being a dancer, it's so much hard work for so little reward, and I think that set me up really well in life. Just you work, 12 hours a week or 14 hours a week, and you might get to perform once a year. And so I love that, and I'm grateful to ballet for that. And I do have a story about, a negative dance experience, and it's funny because I had a woman come up to me the other day and went, "I went to that school." they did had to legal that a little bit, and she went and she told me her horror story at that school, and I was like, oh, I'm glad I put it in there. I'm glad it's in there because there's negatives and positives, but for the most part, dance was a real positive for me, even though I've got a really horrendous bunion, which I blame on ballet.
Definitely that hard work ethic.
I think so.
permeates
Yeah.
through.
And also, I think one thing I really learnt was, I wrote about my friend Rachel Rawlins, who became a huge, successful ballerina, the Royal Ballet and Australian Ballet. And it was my first experience of people levelling. So whenever she wasn't in the room, she's just so naturally incredible. I mean, I was good. There's no comparison. She was going to be a prima ballerina. And, I heard a lot of the young girls when I was young really bitching about her and saying horrible things about her just because she was so good. And it was my first experience of going, well, someone's good, like, you can't change that by saying shit about them. And I think that helped me as I became an actress. And, some people would get all the work and then other people would talk badly about them. And it sort of set me up well in life as far as not talking shit about people because you're jealous. Like, it's so much easier to just celebrate other people's achievements than to stay awake at night stressing about them.
That's so true, and it's such an important part of that.
Yeah.
Good. Well, yeah, ballet's really taking ballet as a young person helps you with that.
Actually, my daughter did it like 3 times. She's like, I hate this. How did you do it for 10 years?
Are your children very similar to you in that way?
My daughter's quite shy. My son's he's like all over the shop, kind of. He's a very bouncy kind of person. They're not really, it's nice because my husband was also really driven as a child. So he was a musician. He doesn't do music anymore, but he was really driven, and it's really nice for us to see our kids just being kids. But I also don't understand that mindset of not being a career child, but I love observing it, and I'm so happy that they just get to be free, and they're completely disinterested in my career. Like, so
As
you
kids
cannot.
are.
Oh my god! Like when I was on Dancing with the Stars, I'm like, do you want to watch it? And they're like, oh, there's reruns of Gumball, and I went, oh. So I'm hoping that's good parenting.
That's great. That's always the case. Good. Do you have any other questions? We have maybe time for 1 or 2 more. My question to you now is because you always love story, and I know that how has writing changed? Has it changed how you read at all?
It has actually. I really read a lot of books now, and I try and sort of look into how they're expressing themselves and why do I like those certain books and what do I not like about these certain books. I read a book recently that everyone loved and I didn't enjoy it, and I broke down why I didn't enjoy it, and it's really nice because now I can read going, well, I want to keep writing, so it's like a learning experience. When I sit down for reading a book now, I'm not wasting time. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just doing a little research. So, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they're all tax deductible now. All you're reading. It's a great, become a writer so you can start deducting your taxes.
Yeah.
What are some of the books that you do connect with? Do you have any recommended titles?
Recently I've been really getting, I love a love story, which is really bizarre because I don't usually, actually at the moment I'm reading Salem's Lot because my nephew told me to read it, and I hadn't read any Stephen King, and my daughter's now reading it because she's got weird bloodlust in her reading. I read a real mix of things. So, a book that I read recently that I really loved was The Heart's Invisible Furies, and The Line of Beauty, which were both these beautiful, long, sort of gay love stories, and they were both sort of thematically quite similar. And then I just recently read one called... It's called The Nanny or something about this killer nanny. It's a French book. Did you know the one I mean? I think it's called Lullaby.
Okay.
It's got all these different titles in different areas. So, yeah, I read that. And the one that I didn't really like, which it was hard to break down, was Less. Have you read Less?
No, I haven't. No.
Anyone read Less? Yeah.
All right.
What did you... Yeah, I know. People loved it. And I know. Isn't it weird? And I thought it was so... The reason why it's in my brain is because it's so well written. It's so incredible. It's really interesting. It's incredibly written, but it was just too overwritten for me. But then the writing was so incredible. I'm like, I could never write like this. Like in a million years, he's so above and beyond any kind of writing that I could do. And so that was interesting. But I do love a classic.
There you go.
I love a classic. So I'll always go back and reread the classics. I love a classic novel.
And being well read. I'm looking forward to like the horror/romance novel that comes out of Pia's brain, I think, given your breadth of reading.
I don't know how
like
Salem Lot's going to go. Has anyone read it? I don't know. I haven't read any Stephen King, so I'm going to give it a shot.
No, it's don't read it at night. I'm such a wuss when it comes to stuff like that and everything, but it's absolutely fascinating. Such good stories and everything. But that's the thing, the key to it.
I just read A Little Life too. That was intense.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. That's impactful story and everything.
I love that because this is a book, about shame. I think shame's really we don't talk about shame enough, and we don't accept shame enough, and I love that it's about shame, that you can live in your own shame and have everyone else around you going, you're so amazing, but you can't hear it if you're so deep in your shame. I love that.
Absolutely, and it is such an important emotion for us to process and feel and go through. Absolutely. Oh, Pia, you are such a brilliant mind and such a wonderful person.
Thank
and
you.
we love your effervescence, I think. Ladies, could I please have everyone give a round of applause?
Thank
to
you.
Pia? Thank you.